Are you an Aussie tradie and your paperwork is shady? Do the dockers farm side keep you up late at night? Are you sick of pushing paper, swinging your tools as more you caper? Call us the tricks of your trade.
Welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast, where we talk about trade business topics to help you get through business life unscathed.
Does the builder pay you late and your cash flow fluctuates? Do you dread the office work? Can't afford a full-time clerk? Consider working smarter, don't be a business martyr. Call us the tricks of your trade.
Hello, welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Serson, construction lawyer, adjudicator, and director of Tricks of Your Trade. Welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Serson, construction lawyer, adjudicator, and director of Tricks of Your Trade. Today on my podcast, I want to talk to you about the likelihood that you will end up in a dispute with your builder under a building contract or a subcontract. Now, this is something that has plagued me for a very long time because I've always known that there is actually a mathematical equation that somebody smarter than me at maths could work out as to what would be the probability. What's the likelihood you're going to end up in a dispute, right? But the problem is I'm really bad at maths, like really, really terrible at maths. So I've never been able to overcome the mathematical barrier to giving you an answer to this. All I've been able to do is talk to you about the number of variables and what those variables look like and what you should be doing when you're reviewing your contracts. But I want to be able to give you sort of like the 1 in 100 year flood type statistic where I can say to you, look, in this 1 in every so many contracts you sign will end up in dispute. It is a statistical likelihood, it's a mathematical probability that you will end up in dispute based on the number of transactions you enter into. So something happened last week that I think might have unlocked this line of thought for me that might help. Now, any of you who have spent any time with me will know that I am an absolute Survivor fanatic. I'm talking about the reality TV show where they go and put everyone on the deserted island and they make them all vote each other off and compete for challenges and compete for food and all those types of things. In part, the reason I love that show so much, and I'm trying very hard not to go down a Survivor rabbit hole here with you and talk just about Survivor, but in part, the reason that I love that show so much is because some things are predictable. The way that people behave is predictable in certain circumstances. So we see repeated behaviors in certain situations where the power dynamics shift. But Survivor continuously throws me up solutions to theoretical problems I have in business and in life. And last week, Survivor gave me the answer, I think, to the formula for what is the likelihood that you will have a dispute under a building contract. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, and then I'll backtrack and I'll explain a little bit further.
But that constitutes 15 one-on-one relationships. You could do the math. It's a pretty simple equation. It's a combination 6 choose 2 factorial equals 15.
So as you can see, there is a mathematical equation that can be done to work out whether or not you're going to have a dispute under your building contract based on the number of people who are involved in the project. So in short, you have got a principal or a landowner. You've also got a bank. That principal under the head contract of the builder may have a superintendent. And then the builder subcontracts out, let's use 50 as the number, 50 subcontractors on an average construction project. Each of those subcontractors will have suppliers and they will have possibly subbies as well, or sub-subbies. So you can see how, based on the number of parties involved in a construction project, the likelihood that there is going to be a dispute or the probability of a dispute is largely impacted on the number of parties that are separated in business transaction, but who are effectively working together on the project. Now, I have to caveat this with, I don't think this formula takes into account the fact that subcontractors can't do things to each other under contract. So really, when you think about what is the likelihood that I'm going to have a dispute with my builder, yes, you only have line of sight between you and your builder. So that's one relationship. But all of these other parties involved in this project have the ability to have a bearing on your success under the contract. So a really good example of that is at the moment we're seeing builders get into fights with developers and having their contracts terminated. So you have zero influence over what happens under the head contract in most situations. In fact, you won't even have line of sight. So you won't know what's going on under the head contract when you're contracting with a builder. But if that builder gets their contract terminated, that's going to have a bearing on whether or not you're going to be paid, what you're going to be paid for. So what type of work? Will you be paid for unfixed goods? Will you be paid for, will you get your retention back is a really good example. Now, under building contracts, builders will always like to insulate themselves as best they can from those scenarios up and down the chain. And that's why those subcontracts are so nasty and one-sided, because the lawyers who draft those contracts try to set those contracts up so that they automate as best they can in favor of their client. And that's the builder. The builder's the one out there paying for the contracts to be written because they're going to give it to 50 subcontractors. So you can see how it makes sense that if something were to happen under the head contract, the builder's lawyer will have written the contract to automate in a way that benefits the builder, doesn't benefit you. But that's a really good example of how one interrelationship under a building contract can have a bearing on whether or not you end up in dispute with your builder, because I can tell you from experience, we have clients going through this right as I record this webinar, that when your contract gets terminated by your builder because they had their contract terminated, the builder won't be getting their retention back under the head contract. In fact, that principal's probably trying very hard not to pay the builder a single cent more. So they're going to want to try to hold on to your retention, and they're very unlikely to pay you for unfixed goods. And the way that the builders are approaching this problem, who have got lawyers behind them who are advising them to use this strategy, is that they're disputing the valuation of the work carried out. So if you're a mechanical subby and you have installed 14 levels of a 27-story building and you're still in the rough-in stage of your work, then the builder will say, well, no, your work isn't 27% complete, it's 21% complete, and they'll value down your progress claim so they don't have to pay you any more money. Now, the practical problem for you in that situation is, how do you prove you've done 27% instead of 21%? Well, you're going to have to try to get somebody on site to be able to do what they call a QS report, a quantity surveyor's report, or give you a valuation assessment of how much work you have actually carried out. And that's a really good example of how, if you can fall back on site records and you've got impeccable ITPs signed off by the builder to show that you have in fact done the amount of work that you say you've done, you're in a much better position. So I digress. Where I'm going with that is I'm getting into the weeds of the things that you need to do administratively to have control over the variables in your business transaction that will prevent you from getting into a dispute. And if you do get into a dispute, actually getting paid. Because I can tell you from experience that when you get into a construction dispute, it all crystallizes in a payment claim. All the he said, she said back and forth will come down to, are you going to be paid that money? Or is the builder claiming money from you that they want you to pay to them? So in terms of this mathematical equation, I put it out to a colleague of mine, Cara Seawright from Sub-ECA. Now, Cara is the yin to my yang. She is the maths to my English. And Cara and I together, we can completely make a whole human being. So she has done the maths for me on this in terms of, if you were to have a project where you have got more than 50 subcontractors, so you've got 50 subcontractors, you've got one builder, and you have got a superintendent as well. This is how you would work out what the maths is. Now, I'm just going to share this with you so that you can see it. Now, if you're listening to this on audio, you can jump on my website and watch this, but you can also go to YouTube. I've got a great person who puts my things up on YouTube for me. So I'm going to get this open so you can see it and share that screen. Now, Kara's done the maths. Like I said, I don't think this takes into account if you are a subcontractor, the fact that other subbies on site can have a bearing on your success of getting your trade work done when you don't have any way of doing anything contractually to these other subcontractors. But this is what Kara's come back for me with. She's come back for me with, there are 50 subcontractors, 1 builder, 1 client-side superintendent. So it's 50 plus 1 equals 5250. Plus 1. Oh my goodness, you guys have just got to look at this. I'm sharing it on the screen. I'm going to put it into the show notes of my podcast with a little screenshot so you guys can see the maths that Kara's done. I'm so mathematically illiterate, I will confess that I can't even read you that formula. That's gibberish to me. So hopefully you can all take some comfort in the fact that I nerd out in my reading and contract interpretation space, not in maths. So the reason I need to bring this to your attention is because when you are entering into contracts with your builder, you can do everything right. You can literally do everything right. But there are variables that will come into play while you are completing your work that will have a bearing on whether or not you end up in dispute. So these are the levers that I'm talking about, the in the weeds levers that you can use to control the outcome of the success of your contract with your builder. There are going to be things that are outside of your control that even if you do everything right, things can go pear-shaped. So you need to expect that there is a probability, there is a likelihood based on the number of transactions you enter into and the number of parties involved in those transactions that you will end up in a dispute at some point. So the first thing that I really like to promote, and you guys will have heard me talk about this again and again and again on my podcast, is doing due diligence on your clients. So you actually want to check into the builder that you're working for. There are a handful of credit checks you can get these days. Most subbies we know have got access to Creditor Watch or something like that. I'm not saying that's the be all and end all. In fact, sometimes Creditor Watch and other platforms like that can come with their own problems if that's all you're relying on, because by the time they have the information and they're prepared to publish that information, the problem has become so big, like it's more than just where there's smoke, there's fire. Usually the place is on fire and people should have known about it well and truly before those platforms become aware. You can look up to see if your builder's in court with people and who they're in court with. There are places you can look up in certain states and territories as to see whether your builder has been in adjudications and whether they've had to pay money out or whether what they had been fighting about. Some of that information is quite valuable as well. But your contract terms with your builder is by far, I believe, one of the best variables that you can have in your favor to protect you from a dispute with your client. And the thing about it is, a lot of subcontractors are not negotiating their terms with their builder because they're worried the builder won't say yes. They're worried that they're going to lose the job. They don't even know what to ask for in some situations, which is completely understandable. Some of the contracts that I read are super complicated and not something that most people can read without significant training in that area. But the tone of your negotiation with your builder will have a massive bearing on whether or not you get the terms across the line that you need. And the actual act of negotiating terms with your builder is a little bit of a test. It's a relationship test to see if the builder's going to pull a plug on you. It's like if you go on a Tinder date and you just pick the scab a little bit on a little bit of a sore topic and the person blows up at you and walks out of the restaurant. Are you going to be kicking yourself going, oh, I really wanted to marry that one, you know? So you guys need to think a little bit more practically about, well, if by simply negotiating terms with my builder, it tanks the deal, what was the little bit of information in the background that I didn't know about? What was the builder actually going to do to me? Did the builder want me to sign up to these terms because they had an ulterior motive? I appreciate I sound super paranoid when I say things like that, guys, but I see it all the time. It's one of those things where you become quite cynical when you have, 2 or 3 phone calls a day about a subcontractor who's got a problem with a builder and it was a stitch up from the start. You can see it plain as day. So if you've got a highly volatile builder that's prepared to pull the plug on you just because you asked for changes to the contract, I would say that possibly that person wasn't meant to be. You weren't meant to be in business bed with that person. Now, your performance under contract is going to also have a major bearing on whether or not you end up in dispute. And the tone that you take with your builder with these micro negotiations for variations, for back charges, for extensions of time, for access to the crane, you name it, you guys are having micro negotiations day in and day out in order to be able to get things across the line. So that relationship management that you guys hold so dear and constantly are saying to me, Michelle, I don't want to ruin the relationship. I don't want to ruin the relationship. If you really do value that relationship, I can't recommend more strongly that you get some negotiation training. So for most of you out there, I think you will have heard me talk about my negotiation school for construction subcontractors. I do run a course on negotiation for construction subcontractors. So if that's something that is of interest to you, then head to my website and you can have a look at our negotiation school course. Now, in closing, I just want to play this little video for you again, because I know that when you first watched it at the start of this podcast or heard what this guy was talking about at the start of this podcast, it might have been a bit left of field and you might not have really appreciated what he was saying. But what he's doing is he's showing you that if I have 6 people on my tribe, I only need 2 friends in order to not get voted out. So the mathematical likelihood that I'm going to be voted out is based on the number of possible relationships that I can have under the tribe. So watch this.
But that constitutes 15 one-on-one relationships. You could do the math. It's a pretty simple equation. It's a combination. 6 choose 2 factorial equals 15.
So as you can see, it's not just about you. It is not just about you. In order for me to give you a probability on what is the likelihood that you will end up in dispute, it could be 1 in 1,275, according to Cara. And I will put up the way that she has worked that out for you based on 50 subcontractors on a construction project. But I suspect that it's actually much, much higher. And that is because the variables the strings that you can pull will have such a major bearing on whether or not you end up in dispute, because you will dodge bullets. This would be the natural, clean mathematical equation if there were no variables. But the variables that are existing, that are available to you to be able to do when you enter into contracts with your builders, those are the strings that you can pull to make sure that you bring that number into a much more favorable range for you. So I hope that's been helpful. It has been a little while since I've done a podcast, and I am planning on doing many, many more podcasts this year, but I have had to prioritize. We've had some very big court matters that we've been involved in, and I've also started my own law firm this year. So I have had my mind elsewhere, but this podcast is something that I absolutely really adore bringing to you. And it is my intention to keep it going and to keep adding to it. So thank you for everybody who has been in touch with me, who has been saying, hey, when's the next podcast coming out? Here it is. Watch this one. Okay, see you guys. If you have any questions about what I've talked about on this podcast, feel free to drop me a good old-fashioned email at questions@tricksofyourtrade.com.au. If you would like a systematic approach to your contract administration and getting paid, head on over to our website and check out the Subbies Toolbox. You won't be disappointed there. And just one last time, our web address is www.tricksofyourtrade.com.au.
Are you an Aussie tradie and your paperwork is shady? Do the dockers farm side keep you up late at night? Are you sick of pushing paper, swinging your tools as more you caper? Call us the tricks of your trade.
Welcome to the Tricks of Your Trade podcast, where we talk about trade business topics to help you get through business life unscathed.
Does the builder pay you late and your cash flow fluctuates? Do you dread the office work? Can't afford a full-time clerk? Consider working smarter. Don't be a business martyr. Call us the tricks of your trade.